Kenya and China relations is what we are talking about on Kenya at 50 this morning. We're glad you're watching Morning Express. And to just continue on where our economist, Dr. Manyasa, the point you brought on before we took the break about where Kenya's money is coming from, and that's very important, because at the end of the day, we still need to keep selling. We still need to bring the money in. And that for China, perhaps, for them, it's more about them making the money.
My view is this. China is selfish. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think what has happened to us as Kenyans, we've been handheld for so long by the West that we're actually scared of walking by ourselves. I think it's time we woke up and appreciated that we are grown up, that if somebody is going to take advantage of you, it is your fault. It is not his. In international socio-economic engagement or political engagement, every country is out there trying to do what is in their best interests. They don't, even the West that has a much more softer approach to how they do things, are still driven first and foremost by their own personal interests. So the problem is that China is culturalized to not be very vague about it. They don't beat about the bush. They're very clear. We want oil. We want we have 1.4 billion people, and we need to find something for them to do. We need to be able to fuel them. We need to be able to feed them. We need to be able to get them jobs. If your country can give me any of those, what do you want me to give you in return? There are a lot more. As much as the Asian culture is a lot more, they take a longer time to get there, but they're more direct in what they're looking for. The West is looking for the same thing, they just take a longer period of... And
they take a longer period because they're more stringent in their rules, in terms of governance. They're more particular in who they're getting into bed with, and Chinese really, they'll forget your dark side.
So you see, the West, remember, the West colonized large segments of the world. China did not. The West still has a certain element of, feels a certain sense of responsibility over parts of the world that they had colonized. So when they come to you, before they give you money, they want to know, are you behaving? How have you been of late? You know, that it's something that's still carrying forward. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. You want to make sure that the guys you left are behaving as they grow on and they're getting they're sitting at the table properly. I mean, they're holding their fork and knife properly. China doesn't care. China never had never had that relationship with us. To them, they believe, oh, you're a state, you're a nation state. That means you're all grown up. So I want to do business with you. These are my interests. If you can't defend yours, that's your problem. But then there's also the issue about who buys from us. Remember, and one of the reasons why I'm so clear in my head that we can never really become Chinese, for lack of another word, is that we are so cultured pro-West that we cannot. We're socially, our social infrastructure, our social development is so pro-West that even if we go east now, it is still transactional east. It is never social east. We will never be east. We are cultured. Our trade language is English. Very few people in Kenya actually know how to speak Chinese, leave alone how to write it. So we still have an entire generation that is going to be pro-West. What we need to start thinking about is, what do we, because when people are saying the West is what buys from us, it is true, but it's because we have been cultured to develop and produce things that the West needs. We haven't been cultured to develop anything that the East needs. What we need to think about, and especially for the business community, is how do we identify, if we could sell anything to 1.4 billion Chinese, my friend, we'd be in serious business.
Sorted.
So what we need to start thinking about is, what do we develop? What do we produce that the Chinese can? What can we produce that the Chinese can buy?
But one thing you need to keep in mind.
Let's talk to Morgan, then you'll continue on that. Hold that thought. Morgan, good morning.
Good morning there.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you very much. I don't think we should enter the dragon. Because, first of all, even before the coming of the Portuguese, we were trading with the Chinese. They sailed to the East African coast. Now, they gave us porcelain mugs and cups and mirrors, silk, in exchange for gold and ivory. That exchange does not seem to be fair. So how can we expect them to be fair right now? And I think this partnership is bound to fail, because in the first place, China is a communist nation. Kenya is a capitalist nation. So how does that work? So if we continue being this arrogant to the West, then they might decide to impose embargoes on our goods. Remember, in the past phase, China is not a democracy. So how does that work? Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. And Mheshimiwa, you'll address that in as far as whether we're being a little bit too antagonistic with the West. Continue with your point.
I just wanted to jump in with something smaller than what Ngujira just said. He says we need to think of what to produce to sell to China and to the East. Globally, China doesn't import from anyone. It's not just from Kenya. They don't import from other countries. If you look at what China sells to the world and what they buy from the rest of the world, what they buy from the rest of the world is tiny. So their structure, their economic organization is such that it discourages importation. They have weakened their currency to the extent that importing from China is very difficult.
Yes.
So they are structured in such a way that we won't break through. The US has been complaining it is trying to break through into the Chinese market. And they have devalued their currency, which makes it very difficult for Chinese to import. So I think that is almost a lost cause. But I also think that China and Africa, our relations are that of, they could easily develop into patronizing if we are not careful. And that is my biggest worry, that we need to be very careful to relate with them, to stick to our previous partners. I had hoped that Mheshimiwa Mithika would be here because he has also been using language that is almost bordering on hate speech, trying to insinuate that white Africans, white people in Kenya are not Kenyans and we should repossess their land. And at the same time complaining about not selling miraa to UK. And I had to ask him, why don't you sell them to China?
First of all, to me it pains me when I listen to Kenyans saying, to hell with the West, we go east, let our government get funding from China. But they forget, and the same people who are talking like that are the tea farmers, the coffee farmers, the people, the flower farmers, the people who would want their goods to be exported. And because of ignorance, we talk like we don't know what is economically important to us as a country. I think, as we have said in this forum before, even as we look for some quick funding, because we seem to be getting quick funding from China for obvious reasons. As I said, China is basically an extractive economy. But even as we get that fund and looking at it in terms of how does it develop our infrastructure, we need also to maintain our relationship with the West. If you look at our budget, the social aspect of the budget is purely funded from the West, and that, to me, you can never get from China, because China is an economy that will never fund any social aspect, even though it's a communist country. So we need to think about that, to think about our exports, where do we take it, and maintain a good working relationship with the West, even as we look east for these infrastructural development funds, which we can't rule out. In fact, there's a caller who spoke like we said, we don't want standard gauge railway. No one has said we don't want it. Actually, this SGR, it must be understood, this is a project which started in the last government. And the current government is just implementing it, which is a good thing. So we need to support it, but even as we do that, we need to look at the best interests of our country. Finally, I wanted to appeal to those who are offering advice to the president to read a very simple book, How Nations Fail. And this book clearly explains to you why South Korea is more developed than North Korea, and it's just divided by a boundary. Just come closer home. Ask yourself why Botswana is more developed and the neighboring countries are not. Ask yourself why Democratic Republic of Congo has failed, and it had so much resources, and many other places. And you will get the answer on a country that does not believe on inclusive political and economic institutions will never succeed. Extractive economies fail everywhere in the world. And that is why Mexico and America, USA, which is just divided by a boundary, have different economies and with clear disparities because of this kind of arrogance, because of this kind of approach that we are taking. When when a prime minister of China comes here, we see him like God, yet the guy probably has come for his own selfish, not probably, but certainly has come for his own country's selfish interest.
All right, let's talk to William calling us as well. William, good morning.
Morning, madam.
Thank you for calling.
Yes, I wanted to support Honorable Mbaki for what he has said. In fact, really, the Chinese, I mean the eastern part, that we doesn't benefit from them. You see, like, for instance, we normally get those people from West, especially from Europe and America. So we find that most of the East countries doesn't benefit from them. Also, if you see some of our scholars from Kenya and even Africa as a whole, they normally go to West. They don't go to China. There is nothing there because it is overpopulated. So we find that we are normally benefiting from the West. So I normally support. I normally support the West because we normally benefit from them, and that is why if we just fight now that we are going to the East, those people want to exploit our resources, and we are not going to benefit from them because they normally want to get something and take to their country. They want their people to come to our country and to benefit from the little employment we have in Kenya and other African countries.
All right, William, thank you very much for watching and for calling. You know, what he's talking about benefiting even in terms of employment, which you touched on earlier, because in as far as whether local labor will be used, local materials, some of the perhaps experts locally, will be just in a stream again of Chinese coming into the country. That's also now a concern at the grassroots level, as where this, you know, work will be taking place as the railway cuts across. It's an issue of concern as well.
I think for me what concerns me the most is how this conversation every time, I mean, and it's not just on this platform, but how the conversation about the Chinese always de-escalates to Kenya, to East versus West, to East or West. While in essence what we actually have is East and West. I mean, Kenya is just, as I said, Kenya cannot become East. We are not cultured, we're not socialized. It's just not possible for us to have East as more than a trading partner. We're always going to be pro-West. I think that is a fact that we must accept. And even when the president speaks the way he spoke over the weekend, he's telling traditional partners, you guys have been treating us badly, these guys are treating us okay. It's not that he's telling them go away. This is a part that we as Kenyans don't seem to understand. The president went to Amherst. He didn't go to Bangkok University. I mean, his basic leaning and his basic socialization in his formative years is West. So what we actually have is a situation, and for me the concern is, are we looking at what is our big picture? What does our big picture look like? Is our big picture going to the East? Is our big picture going to the West? Or is our big picture developing Kenya? The Chinese, incidentally, if I could quote them, have a very interesting saying. It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. You know, this is a saying borrowed from the Chinese. And I think for us, as Kenyans, that's what we need to be thinking about. It doesn't matter whether the money we are getting is in dollars or it's called yuan. Yeah, they have a much more complicated name for their currency. The issue is it developing our country? Is it actually serving our interests? The feeling that we are going to be exploited by Chinese is something we just must get used to. We are going to get exploited by whoever we are dealing with. The issue is that are they exploiting us in a way that we are exploiting it? Are we getting any benefits from that exploitation? Africa is become it's now become the continent where everybody is trying to exploit. Why? Because it's still the only continent that is discovering things. It seems everything has been discovered everywhere else. Africa is still the place where you're discovering new things. So people are going to keep trying to exploit Africa. The issue is as they exploit us, what is happening? And we're going to get exploited by the Chinese, by Europe, by the Americans. We will get exploited. Let's not bury our heads in the sand and assume that we are not going to get exploited. However, this exploitation has to have a capacity to move us. China has grown at 9% from 1978 every year. They are not, as one caller said, they're not a capitalist country. Ironically, they deal with other nations from a capitalist base, which is pure. They're actually pure capitalists when they deal with other nations, but they're actually a communist country. So those are the ironies we need to figure out and pick up.
Mheshimiwa perhaps also needs to respond to what you raised, the concern about we're hearing sort of like threats from members talking about repossessing land by Europeans because of this ban on Mira. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, I think those are careless talks. We listen to quite often from politicians, and I'm one of them, I know, but sometimes some of the talks are just too careless that you don't expect it to come from someone who occupies a position of significance. The talks that come from Mugabe, if you find a Kenyan politician talking about it, it must be condemned. In my view, if I were the president, that is something that you cannot keep quiet about. I think it needs to be, such an MP needs to be reprimanded and even asked to steps be taken. He should be asked to record a statement and explain what he means. Because really, if we start something like that, you don't know how Kenyans will behave, because he's speaking to some constituency, however small that constituency is, and I think that needs to be condemned. But the other concern that I have is the fact that we cannot even mention the Chinese currency in this forum just tells you that we don't deal with these people. Actually, we are not in business with these people. So, because if we were in business with them, the average Kenyan would know the currency that is used in China.
Even the Prime Minister's name.
Yeah, but you find Kenyans who will tell you about the dollars, the pounds, the euros, etc. But they will not mention, even the yen, actually, we would talk about it. But talk about Chinese currency is because Kenyans really don't do much business with them. So in my view, I think, as Wambugu says, and I agree with him, that really this debate about getting funding from China, we need to restructure it and reposition it. We need to redefine it to understand that as we look for funds there, we first have to safeguard the interests of the country in whatever contract we sign, we enter into, and that is our role as members of parliament, and also the executive's role. But also, we must maintain our relationship with the West, because look at, I've just said, social funding is purely from the West. Look at the NGOs. Tell me any NGO in this country from China. I can't remember any. So in terms of funding certain aspects of our lives, including funding of the HIV and AIDS, which is real disaster in this country, comes from the West. So we really need to maintain our relationship with the West as we look also east. And finally, if you allow me, very finally, I really don't know when Wambugu talks about the West misbehaving or putting, is this behavior, does it mean that when the West tells us, govern yourself properly? And we can't deny this. There is ethnicity in this country. We killed each other in 07. We can't deny it, even if you have not got the right people who killed, if the ones who are at the Hague will be released. But there must be people who engineered the killing of the people in this country. If that is the crime, if the West talks about that is a crime, to me, it's a positive crime. And for me, if there are cases where the West have insisted in us doing certain things that are wrong, we need to point out that. But if in terms of governance, in this continent, we are misbehaving in terms of governance, and we need a prefect, you cannot deny it. If you don't need a prefect, then behave properly.
So we need a prefect.
We need a prefect.
Finally, Dr. Manyasa, finally.
Thank you. I was going to take up the same matter, because every time we mention that the West has been giving us conditions, which are these conditions? When they demand accountability for the funds they give us, is that a bad condition? Are we then ready to substitute that with an unconditional loan which may just be misappropriated? It's admitted by government 30% of our budget gets lost. If someone demands that you don't lose 30% of the loan I'm giving you, is that a bad condition for Kenyans? I think that is something we need to discuss. Secondly, I think even the leaders who are telling the public, I think it's becoming populist to tell the public that we'll go east. But even those leaders don't believe in east. Why am I saying this? I watched the 50th anniversary celebrations here on KTN. I was in the house.
Yeah.
And after all the leaders in East Africa lambasted the West and everything, I saw the aerial view of the limos they were driving in out of the stadium, and none was from China. No one was even driving in a Toyota from Japan. Everything was German. So I don't think they even believe in the East they are talking about. It's just populist to say East. But most importantly, let the president keep his promise to Kenyans to look forward. Anybody from the East who is supporting us, we welcome that. Anybody from the West who is going to support us, we welcome that. And let the discussion be what is the best for Kenya.
Okay.
Not we are going to go this way, you have been this, you have been that. That is just not important for us.
All right, gentlemen, we'll end it there. Thank you very much.
I'm not saying.
Kunjiri Wambugu. What did you
I wanted to say something I wanted to say
Yes.
as a wrap up.
Right.
I think it's important. I first and foremost have not at any point said that I believe the West is misbehaving. I quoted what the political establishment is saying. I do not believe the West is misbehaving. I think that it's important for us to get the best, as he said, to get the best from each, and not just the East and West. We have Africa as well.
True.
We have neighbors. So let's get the best. I mean, Uganda is our biggest trading partner. So as we develop our economy, we need to develop it from what is in our, we need to have a big picture. If our infrastructural income comes in from the East, we get it. Social revenues, if our social budget can only be funded by the West, we get it from the West. If Africa is going to bring something to us, let's get it from there. I think that's what we need to do.
Thanks for clarifying. Kunjiri Wambugu, it's about to call an economist, columnist, Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, economist, and Honorable John Mbadi Super MP. Thank you all for being part of our show this morning, talking about that China-Kenya relations. Somebody was tweeting chicken. Chicken. We'll take a short break. When we return, we have a news update, and of course, the conversations on Morning Express continue. Don't go away.